Hey everybody, this is Dan, and this is a video of a meeting with former CIA Director James Woolsey discussing the threat of an E.M.P on America. And before we get into it, I just wanted to take just a couple seconds and ask you guys, if you like these kind of videos, if you could hit the thumbs up and the subscribe button. That helps me out a lot to know that I'm doing an okay job. So enough with the plug. I'm going to be breaking this video up into 10-minute chunks because, let's face it, you guys got things to do. So I hope you find the video educational, gives you something to think about.
I appreciate it. I'm sorry to be late. I went to 10 G Street Northwest, which is some distance from here. But leading my wife on similar occasions to say, Director of Central what? This problem started out more than a century ago when Tesla, for very good reasons, and Westinghouse defeated Edison and GE. And we ended up with an alternating current grid that lets one transmit from a much smaller number of generating stations than we would have needed if we'd gone with direct current, with a relatively limited number of generating stations, let one, beginning in the late 19th century, transmit electricity by stepping up with transformers, stringing wires, stepping down with transformers, transmit electricity for substantial distances. Had we gone with Edison's plan, we would have had small coal-fired generators all over every city in the United States. So Tesla won for good and sufficient reason then. As time has gone on, from the beginnings of the electric grid in the 1880s until today, we have essentially had two times in which Americans began to really fear and take cognizance of their infrastructure and worry that something might happen to it. I'd say, and after December 7th, 1941, that spirit, worrying about German and Japanese submarines off shore and so forth, probably lasted 3 or 4 or 5 months. By then, we were pretty clear that we controlled the seas around us and beyond. And I'm sure some people began to worry about infrastructure on 9/11, but for most people it didn't last very long. So since we have 18 critical infrastructures in the U.S., water, food, etc., and the other 17 depend to one degree or another on electricity, the fact that our electric grid is alternating current, transformers being the heart of the system, 2,000 to 3,000 of them in North America, in the United States, has created a situation where we were in perfect shape to make some other mistakes. And the other mistakes that we made, giving due allowance to the brilliance of the engineers who put together the electric grid. It is amazing. It's a nationwide system, probably the largest machine in the world in a sense. Most of the time you need to plug in a light. You can plug in a light and you get electricity. It's a just-in-time system. For all practical purposes, you're producing the electricity at the same time you use it, so you've got to make constant adjustments. But in good times, it works. And so those two blips on the screen after Pearl Harbor and after 9/11 probably didn't do enough to agitate anyone to try to take another look at the way the electric grid was constructed or any of the assumptions behind it. And as we come up into the 1990s, two things happened. First of all, the web began to come into existence and people began to rely on it more and more. Now, the web was put together by a handful of geniuses almost all of them part of my flower child generation. And for at least some of them, the idea was share. There is nothing that can go wrong if you share. The world is like a kindergarten sandbox. If we just learn to share, everything will be fine. And we began to share. And some people, 19-year-old private first class who decided, teenager, decided he would give millions of classified cables to WikiLeaks and on and on. Lots of people shared. And it was a potential problem, but nothing manifested itself right away. And along about the same time, sort of late 90s instead of early 90s, we decided we also ought to decontrol and the electric grid so that if you could buy from Tulsa, Oklahoma, electricity more cheaply by half a cent a kilowatt hour in Maine than in Washington State, then buy it from Washington State. Exchanges would pop up, things would work, and they did. All of this, in a sense, works. But it was put together with this wild dance of buying and selling electricity all over the country simultaneously, producing while you use, relying for the heart of the matter on 2,000 or 3,000 pieces of equipment, very easily damaged and protected by a cyclone fence only, virtually every place they are located. Even at nuclear power stations, the transformers are normally not protected any better than transformers are anyplace else. The nuclear materials are in the nuclear station, but the electricity is, in most cases, not all, but in most cases, outside. So we have a situation where we put this all together essentially without anyone giving a single thought to security. There has been virtually no attention to security of even the most basic types. For example, a few years ago, out here at PJM, the exchange, East Coast for a number of states, a gentleman showed up from China. And he said that he was looking into the way electric grids worked, and he wondered if he could look into the files and the plans and so forth for PJM. And PJM, I don't know, they called the State Department. Somebody at the State Department said, oh, well, he's Chinese. We want to be nice to the Chinese. Sure, let him have a look.
Sure.
And some months later, someone in the federal government finally heard about this and decided to call him and see what was going on. They got him on the phone. He spoke very good English. Chinese intelligence officers often do. And he said that, yeah, he was nearly through with his work, and they said, would you like to come in and share with us what you were doing? We can talk to you about what, we're all working on electric grids. He said, sure, I'd be glad to be in. Day after tomorrow, okay? And they said, yeah, day after tomorrow's fine. And the next day, he flew to Beijing. What did he take? What did he learn? Was he a sophisticated engineer? Not? Who knows? We'll never know. But whether it is putting cyclone fences and nothing more around transformers, which if they are taken down, a handful of them can knock out a major section of the country, and they take well over a year to construct, and they're built in South Korea and Northern Europe. Whether it is that kind of inattention to security, or sure, if you're Chinese, we like Chinese, come look at our grid plans. Whatever it is, this country is not well served by the way the electric grid is protected or by the people who are doing it. Now, it is not their fault, the fault of the individual engineers and the others who are only given a specific task, figure out where to put the cyclone fence, and so they put it the best place they can. It's not their fault. In a sense, it's all of ours, because there is virtually no structure to the electricity grid's management. The Department of Energy, as nearly as I can tell, has a small, competent, very small staff, and they do some studies. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has more substantial responsibilities. They regulate transmission and its long-range transmission and its cost. They nominally have some kind of authority for some aspects of security, but probably in the statutes they're pretty murky. You would say that most of the security is in the hands of NERC, the North American Electricity Reliability Corporation. NERC is essentially a trade organization of some 3,500 utilities. A footnote. When the Founding Fathers put together the American Constitution that hot summer in Philadelphia, they had as their model the Roman Republic's Constitution, not empire, republic. And they knew one thing had gone terribly wrong with the Roman Republic, and that was how to control the military. Much of the rest was pretty good, and it worked kind of like our Constitution. But controlling the military, that's what came apart. That led Caesar, Brutus, all of that. So when the Founding Fathers were putting our Constitution together, they said, that we've got to fix. And they fixed it pretty well. We have a president who's the commander-in-chief. We have a Congress that approves the money. And those are the only players, and you can't choose up sides in the Congress and appropriate only for your favorite general, and the way the Romans did, and so forth. You got it. It's a pretty good system that we've got. But we have one commander-in-chief. So although sometimes we mess up, we've at least got a chance of having a structure that defines an objective and figures out how to deal with fighting a war. We are at war now with those who want to take down our electricity grid, and we have 3,500 generals, all equal, that would be the utilities in the United States, who are kind of sort of in charge of it a little bit maybe. The deputy director of ARPA-E, the energy side of ARPA, told me a few weeks ago that he had crunched these numbers himself, and that the 3,500 utilities in the United States spend less annually on research and development than does the American dog food industry. Now, we have pretty healthy dogs in the U.S. You know, all of us like our dogs. But perhaps the technology of improving and protecting the grid has a somewhat higher priority than it is being given. So we are in a situation where we have never really, by the way, there are other players in the electricity business. Probably the most powerful entities are the public service commissions, public utility commissions, of which there are 50 in the country, and they make decisions from time to time about things electrical. One of the big things they don't want is added pennies per month on consumers' electric bills, because then they vote them out of office or get mad at them or write op-eds or whatever. So they are very, very careful not to let any increase in price come about and of electricity, and what that means is that virtually nothing gets spent on security. So we have a structure of the grid and those things that are need to be done in order to protect it that is almost entirely dysfunctional.